The Legend of Zelda has always been famous for its dungeons, sprawling levels with trials and tribulations that test both the player's combat and puzzle-solving skills. Ocarina of Time is no exception, featuring some of the most famous, and infamous, dungeons in the series. Yet the naming convention of many of these dungeons has always perplexed me. Temples. Now, temples in real life serve as places of worship and cultural significance. Many religions around the world use these for rituals and ceremonies. The land of Hyrule also has its own religion. Though strictly not named, I'll be calling it hylianism for the sake of simplicity and my sanity, so I can avoid saying the Hylian religion over and over. So what exactly is hylianism? Well, to understand it, we'll first need to take a bit of a history lesson. Long ago, before time itself, 3 golden goddesses descended upon the primordial chaos and shaped the land of Hyrule. Once their work was complete, the goddesses left a golden relic containing a small portion of their power on the new world, the Triforce. It was left in the care of another goddess, Hylia, and was sealed in the Sacred Realm, a land of golden skies. The descendants of Hylia went on to establish the Kingdom of Hyrule, and its princess, Zelda, is believed to be the mortal incarnation of the goddess herself. The goddess also chose a hero, who would defend the land if evil ever were to appear. This brings us to Ocarina of Time and the 6 sages. The sages are individuals that are chosen by the goddess to protect the land of Hyrule, willing or not. The sages guard the entrance to the Sacred Realm, and assist the hero in his quest to vanquish evil. Each of the sages are associated with their respective elements, and each element has its own corresponding temple. But wait a minute. An abandoned mansion in some haunted forest? A burning ruin in the crater of an active volcano? A dungeon used to imprison and torture enemies of the royal family? These don't sound like temples. They sound more like death traps. And that brings us to the topic of today's video. How would Ocarina of Time's temples serve as places of worship? First things first, how will I actually rank these? Well, I've come up with a system. The Occupational Safety of Hyrule Association, or OSHA. Wait a minute. Each temple is ranked from the following categories: safety, accessibility, and convenience. Each category is scored from 1 to 5, and the scores are averaged for the total rating for the temple. Now, let's go over each category in depth. First, safety. Is the temple safe? Most of these dungeons are filled to the brim with traps and monsters, as well as an extra powerful monster at the end. This could prove dangerous. Second, accessibility. Where is the temple located? How easy is it to reach? Some of these temples are located in treacherous landscapes, which are sometimes too much for even the hero himself, requiring special equipment just to gain access. I will also be giving an overview of each temple and its inhabitants, so you can better understand where I'm coming from. Finally, convenience. How easy would it be to actually conduct a ceremony here? These dungeons twist and turn, overlapping on themselves, as well as having their innermost sanctums locked with a heavily guarded key. Again, these categories are ranked on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the worst, and 5 being the best. With that out of the way, let's begin. First on our list is the Temple of Light, the gathering place of the 6 sages, and the resting place of the Triforce. Located beyond Hyrule in the Sacred Realm, the temple cannot be accessed through normal means. The only way of accessing it is by pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal, which can only be done by the Hero of Time. Once you actually reach the place, we immediately run into a problem. What exactly is it? The only thing here is a platform under a waterfall that goes in all directions, with nothing but a blue-black void stretching as far as the eye can see. The only navigable part of the temple is the platform in the center, with a staircase that seemingly appears out of nowhere, but only in a link between worlds. The only ones present are the sages themselves, and since only a select few can access it, they don't make for much of a crowd. On to the scoring. First off, is it safe? Well, regarding the sheer drop and falling water, along with the hidden staircase going way higher than I'd like, I'd say that this place is a potential hazard. 2 out of 5. Is it accessible? The temple itself is contained within the sacred realm, making it impossible to reach by normal means. Thus, normal people are incapable of reaching it. I doubt many people have. 1 out of 5 for accessibility. Is it convenient? Judging by the fact that the only notable thing in the temple is the Triforce and the sage symbols on the floor, maybe you could do something with that? There's just not a lot to work with here, even with the sages present. For convenience, I give the Temple of Light a 2 out of 5. Not a very good start. The Temple of Light, while having major significance in the cosmology of hylianism, the temple itself isn't very impressive, or safe for that matter. It's sealed off in a nigh unreachable location, with nothing but a platform with a couple of symbols on it. For the Temple of Light's final score, I give it a low 1.5 out of 5. The Forest Temple is the first dungeon Link must trek through after claiming the Master Sword, and is located in the Lost Woods, close to Link's hometown of Kokiri Village. Saria, the Sage of the Forest, is trapped within. The temple itself is a large manor, surrounded by a hedge maze, and is surprisingly open air for a Zelda dungeon, with walled-off gardens and courtyards as well as the foliage found throughout. The interior is what you would expect from a manor or castle, with hanging portraits and fine red carpets, as well as fairly modern-looking doors. This place may have once been home to a wealthy noble, or perhaps even the royal family themselves. Despite the homely appearance, the Forest Temple is straight up just haunted, like, with ghosts and stuff. The walls shift and twist, and the undead walk, float, or crawl among the halls. The enemies present are fitting of the haunted house aesthetic, with Stalfos, Fire Bubbles, Wolfos, Skulltulas, Wallmasters. The temple's main gimmick centers around the lighting the 4 torches located in the central room, which are subsequently stolen by the 4 Post Sisters, forcing Link to track them down in order to progress. The sisters themselves, Joelle, Beth, Amy, and Meg, were most likely the original inhabitants of the temple, and now haunt the halls in death. They serve as pseudo-bosses in the dungeon, forcing Link to track them down and defeat them. Vanquishing these spirits return the different colored flames to the Grand Hall, and grants access to the temple's basement, and the boss. The boss of the Forest Temple is Phantom Ganon, a monster created to resemble the likeness of the King of Thieves himself. The battle consists of him darting in and out of paintings on his special steed, and can only be damaged with the bow. After hitting him enough times, the shadow dismounts and begins a game of Dead Man's Volley, essentially just forcing Link to play a deadly game of tennis until one of them slips up and is hit with the ball. After a few rounds of this, coupled with a few staff attacks, Phantom Ganon is defeated, and the Sage of Forest is freed. The Forest Temple seems much more habitable than the previous temple, due to it being a house. Let's see how it fares in the rankings. Is it safe? Well, if it weren't for all the monsters and shifting walls, the Forest Temple would actually be quite safe. As well as secluded in a dense forest, making sure no one can disrupt you. 4 out of 5 for safety. Is it accessible? The temple is surrounded by a dense forest, but not just any forest, the Lost Woods, where anyone who enters becomes irreversibly lost. They say that those who wander the forest for too long are transformed into something else. 1 out of 5. Is it convenient? Once you're inside, the aforementioned shifting walls and twisting hallways may prove difficult to anyone who would want to perform a ceremony here, unless you confine it to the Great Hall. And with the lack of light, thanks Post Sisters, might make it hard to see. For convenience, I give the Forest Temple a 3 out of 5. The Forest Temple was overall a lot better than the first item on this list, and could have actually been used as a temple in some previous era of Hyrule. The temple is relatively safe, with the Grand Hall being completely devoid of monsters, and said room is very spacious. The only problem is its location, the Lost Woods. That may cause an issue. For its final score, I give the Forest Temple a 3 out of 5. High above Kakariko Village, in the crater of an active volcano, lies the Fire Temple. The Fire Temple is the second temple Link must traverse on his quest. Too hot for Hylians, Link is only able to survive the heat with help from the Goron Tunic, special armor woven from Dodongo scales and bombflower fibers. The inside of the temple is the most temple-like thing we've seen so far, with stone walls and for some reason, real-world religious iconography and chanting. Darunia's son, also named Link, sends us here to find a group of missing Gorons, and his dad. The imprisoned Gorons were put here by Ganondorf, who most likely intends to feed them to the ancient dragon that made the temple its lair. The dungeon is full of what you'd expect from a volcano, with pits of lava and magma vents, with nothing but hanging metal platforms stopping you from falling in. There are also many fire-based traps, such as the fire maze, which to this day still confuses me as to how it works. Most of the monsters here, if you can even call some of these monsters, are either made of fire or stone. There are a few more advanced enemies like Stalfos and Lizalfos, but those only appear in a couple rooms. This temple also features my favorite enemy in the series, Door That Falls Down, which is a door that falls down, usually on top of you. After freeing the Gorons, Link obtains the Megaton Hammer, a weapon used to slay the now resurrected dragon that dwells at the volcano's center. That brings us to the boss, Volvagia, an ancient dragon that terrorized the Gorons long ago. It was slain by a Goron hero wielding the Megaton Hammer. Also semi-unrelated, but Himekawa's manga, which you should all check out by the way, gives a different backstory to this boss, with it being a baby dragon Link frees as a child, forming a bond with it, only for it to be corrupted by Ganondorf, forcing him to kill it. If the dragon were to escape from the temple, Hyrule would become a burning wasteland. The fight takes place on a platform floating in a pit of lava, with the dragon flying above, and diving below through the many holes in the platform. Link's only way to fight back is to strike it with the Megaton Hammer to stun it, and then wail on it with the Master Sword. Once Volvagia is defeated, Darunia awakens as the Sage of Fire, adding his power to Link's, and Hyrule is saved from becoming a fiery wasteland. The Fire Temple, unfortunately, is not looking so hot. Get it? Death Mountain has never been kind to Hylians, and this place is no exception. While it could have been a Goron temple ages ago, nowadays the temple is a major hazard to everyone, including the Gorons. Is it safe? No. This place is constantly spewing flames, and would prove fatal to any visitors, 1 out of 5. Is it accessible? Definitely not. It's literally in the heart of an active volcano, 1 out of 5. Is it convenient? Absolutely not. Outside of the entrance in the various jail cells, which on their own are a major red flag for any religious establishment, there's nothing but fire and brimstone, and the dangling platforms don't do this place any favors. 1 out of 5. I probably should have seen this one coming, with the volcano and all, but them's the breaks, I guess. The Fire Temple's final score is a 1 out of 5, the worst one so far. I'm gonna put personal biases aside for this one, as this place sucks gameplay-wise. But this isn't about gameplay. This is about in-universe functionality. This is the Water Temple, built in a large underwater cavern beneath Lake Hylia, and is the sacred temple of the Zoras. But after Ganondorf took over Hyrule unopposed, he froze Zora's domain, and the source of that frozen curse now resides within the temple. This is yet another temple that requires special gear to access, that being the Zora Tunic, allowing the wielder to somehow breathe underwater indefinitely. Along with the Iron Boots, Link can safely sink to the bottom of Lake Hylia and enter the temple. The layout of this particular dungeon was best described by Game Maker's Toolkit Mark Brown as a puzzle box dungeon, which means the dungeon itself changes shape as you progress. In the Water Temple's case, that would be the water levels. Throughout the temple, there are special markings on the walls. When Zelda's Lullaby is played near them, the water level in the dungeon changes to the corresponding level on the markings, allowing Link to access previously inaccessible parts of the dungeon. This sounds fine on paper, until you have to do it multiple times, forcing you to backtrack to the different markings to change the water levels. The variety of enemies found here is sparse, as Ocarina of Time doesn't have many aquatic monsters. The ones that are here are fitting of the dungeon's themes, however, with the water strider like Tektites, stingers, and shell blades. Arguably the most interesting enemy in this dungeon is the mini-boss, Dark Link. After a dragon statue puzzle, we come to a strange room, an infinite ocean, stretching as far as the eye can see. Above it, a blue sky. The only things of note are the entrance, the exit, some rocks, and a single island with a tree on it. After going to the room's exit, finding it locked, We turn around only to see a dark figure standing in front of the tree. This is Dark Link, and as the name implies, it is a mirror image of Link. Here's how to beat him.
I've got a punchline for you, Cell. What's 10 plus 9 fingers across the face? What? Heavy.
Defeating Dark Link leads you to the long shot, an upgraded hookshot. This allows Link to access the boss of this dungeon, Morpha. The source of the curse that froze over Zora's domain. It is an amorphous blob of water, or something similar, with a nucleus at its center. Link can only damage it by pulling its nucleus out by using the long shot. Once Morpha is defeated, Princess Ruto awakens as the Sage of Water, and the curse afflicting Zora's domain is lifted. So the game says. The place is still frozen. While the Water Temple would be difficult for Hylians to traverse, we need to take into account the context in which it was built. This place was never designed for Hylians, but Zora. Thus, I will be ranking the temple based on how well it would serve the Zora. Is it safe? While it is underwater, that is no problem for the Zora. And the only real hazards here are near the bottom at the main room. For safety, I give the Water Temple a 4 out of 5. Is it accessible? For Zora, very much so. The entrance isn't sealed at all, and Princess Ruto was easily able to access it before Link. For accessibility, I give the Water Temple our first 5 out of 5. Is it convenient? This is where we have problems, with the changing water levels and all, but the Zora don't need to worry about that. They could just keep the water level at full the entire time. The only issue here is how big the place is, and it could prove confusing to some. For that, I give it a 4 out of 5. The Water Temple, as infamous as it is actually proven to be a fairly decent temple, if you consider the Zora would be the only ones using it. For the Water Temple's final score, I give it a 4.5 out of 5. Beneath the quiet village of Kakariko lies a long-forgotten secret. A secret that the royal family would like to keep. Used by the Sheikah to interrogate, and if that didn't work, torture the enemies of the royal family. This is the Shadow Temple, a place of death, stained with blood, and unfortunately, Link's next destination. A special song is needed to access the small alcove hiding the entrance, the Nocturne of Shadow. Playing this allows Link to warp to the temple's entrance. This place is rather linear for a Zelda dungeon, with only a few branching paths that lead to keys or items. The Shadow Temple was infamously used as one giant torture chamber, and the traps here reflect that. There are entire rooms dedicated to nothing but guillotines or spinning Grim Reaper statues with massive scythes. According to the Great Hyrule Encyclopedia, the Shadow Temple was built using the bones of Hyrule's evil dead, and the traps within were designed to add more bodies to the crypts. Fun. Navigation is only possible thanks to both the Lens of Truth, allowing Link to see illusions, and the hover boots, which Link can use to safely cross gaps. Further within are the catacombs, where no doubt many were laid to rest after execution. Some of the bodies down here still walk, in the form of Gibdos. There are other undead here too, like Stalfos and Redeads, as well as the source of countless people's theory videos and childhood trauma, the Dead Hand, which would look more at home in a Resident Evil game than a Zelda game. Near the end of the dungeon is a boat. This boat has a name, the Ferry to the Other World. Riding this sadly doesn't lead to any realm of death, but does lead us to the end of the dungeon, and to the boss. Sealed within the well in the center of Kakariko Village lurks a demon. The creature was later freed by Ganondorf, and now resides in the Shadow Temple. Impa went to seal it, but has not returned. The demon's name is Bongo Bongo. Jokes aside, this thing is a demon, and demons should be taken seriously, even with a name like that. Bongo Bongo is fought on a giant bongo. Okay, maybe don't take him too seriously. With the boss playing the drum to knock Link around, but this can be circumvented with the hover boots. The boss is completely invisible without the Lens of Truth, so magic meter management is key. The boss can be beaten by stunning both his hands, forcing him to attack you with his head, leaving him vulnerable. Once Bongo Bongo is defeated, Impa awakens as the Sage of Shadow, and we can leave this awful place. Judging by the fact that this place was made to be a death trap, I'm not expecting much. The Shadow Temple was specifically made to kill people, and, unless you're running a death cult, it's a bad place to convert into a temple. Is it safe? No. Have you seen this place? Again, unless you're a death cult, these traps are just that. Traps. That can and will kill you. 1 out of 5. Is it accessible? Luckily, no, as this place can only be accessed with a special warping song. I guess you could climb up to the alcove, but it's well hidden, so I doubt many people know about it. 2 out of 5. Is it convenient? Very much no. With traps, corpses, and pits making up much of the temple, almost nowhere is safe. 1 out of 5. I should have seen this coming. Of course the Shadow Temple would score low. There's a big reason why it's taboo for the royal family to talk about this place. I give the Shadow Temple a final score of 1.5 out of 5. Beyond the borders of Hyrule, in the land of the Gerudo, the haunted wasteland sprawls as far as the eye can see. Constantly battered by sandstorms, one can only navigate the desert by passing 2 trials, the River of Sand and the Phantom Guide. Overcoming these trials leads to a massive statue, the Desert Colossus. Built by the ancestors of the Gerudo, it resembles the Goddess of the Sands, a character which we really don't know much about, sadly. Unable to progress due to his adult body, Link must return here as a child with the help of another warping song taught by Sheik, allowing him to squeeze through the small openings to aid Nabooru in finding the temple's treasure. This first part is fairly straightforward, with weaker enemies and simpler puzzles to accommodate for young Link's limited toolkit. This segment is capped off with a fight against an Iron Knuckle, which leads Link to the temple's treasure, the Silver Gauntlets, conveniently located on a ledge overseeing the outside of the temple. This view lets us see Nabooru getting kidnapped before we can give her the gauntlets, and her imprisonment. Changing to an adult might take only an instant for Link, but for Nabooru, 7 years pass before he can rescue her. With no one to give the gauntlets to, Link becomes an adult again and uses them to move the large block barring the entrance to the rest of the dungeon. The main gimmick in the dungeon is light, with many puzzles involving redirecting sunlight onto these honestly terrifying sun faces. These puzzles culminate in a fight against another Iron Knuckle. Killing it leads to the Mirror Shield, capable of reflecting light and magic, allowing Link to more easily solve puzzles. After a final Iron Knuckle fight, geez, there's a lot of these, which turns out to be a brainwashed Nabooru, who has probably been brainwashed for the past 7 years, and is subsequently abducted again. Link gives chase to the boss room, where we face off with the Twin Rova. A pair of 400-year-old twin witches, the sisters Koume and Kotake have secretly led the Gerudo for generations. They served as Ganondorf's surrogate mothers, and are probably the reason he turned out the way he did. Collectively, they are known as the Twin Rova, and are the boss of this temple. Their first phase involves them flying around casting magic, which Link can reflect back at them. Each sister is immune to her own magic, but not each other's. Reflecting one's magic into the other enough times, they perform their double dynamite attack, and fuse into a much larger, and substantially younger witch. She still retains her dual elemental attacks, but instead of reflecting her magic, the Mirror Shield absorbs it. After absorbing either 3 fire or 3 ice spells, the supercharged shield reflects a powerful attack back at her, stunning her, and allowing Link to open to attack. After a few rounds of this, the sisters split apart, and resolve to continue fighting, only to find out that they are already dead. As they ascend to heaven, they argue about whether or not they were sisters to begin with. Once they're gone, Nabooru reveals herself as the Sage of Spirit, and Link can finally challenge Ganondorf. The Spirit Temple is another one of those temples actually built to be used as one. As I mentioned before, the Desert Colossus was destructed by the ancient Gerudo, and depicts one of their goddesses. Curiously, there is a much smaller statue within the temple, albeit much more detailed. I guess one statue simply wasn't enough. Many of the enemies here are only in the more run-down areas of the temple, and areas that are touching the rock that the temple was carved into. Is it safe? Somewhat yes, actually. Many rooms are devoid of enemies and traps are sparse as well, minus the flying pots. 4 out of 5 for safety. Is it accessible? Hardly. The trials one needs to surpass to even make it here are nearly impossible without items like the Lens of Truth. You would also need permission from the Gerudo themselves, and they are usually hostile towards outsiders. 1 out of 5. Is it convenient? Sort of? The only thing holding it back is the large marble blocks scattered throughout, which could probably be moved without the use of the silver gauntlets, but will require a whole team of people. The rest of the temple is actually fairly easy to navigate, and the statue room comes complete with its own altar. 3 out of 5. The Spirit Temple is once again a temple with great cultural significance, but the trials one must complete ensures many will never see this place. The Spirit Temple gets a final score of 3.5 out of 5. To put an end to the endless wars fought over the power of the Triforce, the sage Rairu built over the remains of the sealed temple a new Temple of Time, and sealed the door to the sacred realm within. Its name was taken from the legend of the original chosen hero, who traveled between 2 times. The Master Sword and the spiritual stones acted as keys, ensuring no one could enter the sacred realm again. At least, that's what Rairu thought. Do I really need to say anything about the Temple of Time? This place has it all. Safety, accessibility, convenience, and most importantly, ambiance. There aren't a few places to sit and you have yourself a run-of-the-mill temple. I'm not even going to rank this place in the 3 categories. That's an instant 5 out of 5. With that out of the way, let's get on to the final rankings. I'll go over the top scoring temples in each category, and finally rank them from best to worst. First up, safety. The top safest temples are a 3-way tie between the Forest Temple, the Water Temple, and the Spirit Temple. Second, accessibility. The runner-up to most accessible temple is, unfortunately, the Shadow Temple. In first place, we have the Water Temple, due to a technicality. Finally, convenience. The top 3 most convenient temples are the Forest Temple, the Spirit Temple, and in first place, the Water Temple, also due to a technicality. Now, on to the final rankings. In last place, we have a tie between the Fire Temple and the Shadow Temple. Both temples are extremely hazardous to visitors, with one built explicitly to kill people. In 5th place is the Temple of Light, barely squeaking by with half a point. This place is just too inaccessible and difficult to navigate to warrant placing it any higher. In 4th place, we have the Forest Temple. This temple, while somewhat convenient and safe, is incredibly hard to reach thanks to the lost woods it's surrounded by. In 3rd place, the Spirit Temple. Once again, while the interior is close to ideal for doing temple things, the trials one must face, along with the hostility of the Gerudo, make getting here nearly impossible for most. The runner-up to the best temple, to everyone's dismay, is the Water Temple. It only scores this high due to it being built with the Zora in mind, but falls just short of being the best. And in first place, the temple that actually functions like one, with no glaring weaknesses, is the Temple of Time. A perfect example of what a temple should be, and makes me question what the devs were thinking when naming the rest of these places temples. Welcome to the end of the video. This one was substantially longer than my previous video, and I put a lot more effort in it. I hope the finished product reflects that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again.